Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Bytes video. Today we're going to be doing part 3 of our button press example. We're going to be changing our state machine into code. So if we remember the example problem from parts 1 and 2, we're going to be going off of part 2 with our 4-state state machine for a button press. If we are given just the state machine and we aren't given any information up here, if we don't have this, we only look at this, we can figure out all of this information. We can figure out everything that we need to know. For example, we know that on our transitions, we're always working with A0. So that means that A0 is going to be changing the button. A0 is going to be changing the button. You could call that's our input. Our input is A0. When it's on, it's pressed. A0 is true, it's pressed. And when A0 is false, it's released. You know that because in off release, A0 is false, and on release, A0 is false. And when A0 is true, we go into the press stage and stay there. And when A0 is true, we go into the press state for off. So that's how we can figure out our input from our state machine. Now we can figure out our output. This one's a little bit simpler. You just look around, find your B's. B1 equals 0 and B1 equals 1. We know that B1 equals 1 when it's on, and B1 equals 0 when it's off. Do you need to know what this button is doing or controlling? Not really. You just need to know what the outputs are, which in this case is B1. So now that we have our information, which again is written up here, but that's how you get it from the state machine, we now want to write this into code. We're going to use something called a switch statement. A switch statement is extremely handy. It's almost like a if statement. It's almost like an if statement. If A0 is true, we go to on press. If A0 is false, we go to on release, etc., etc. However, switch, we're going to be using a switch statement instead of an if-else statement. And the switch state, we're going to change it based on the state of the state machine. So we can initialize an int called state and just assume that that's something that's up above. And we're going to have our switch statement for state. And within your switch statement, you're going to have a bunch of cases. Each case is a state. You're going to have 2 different switch statements, but we're going to start with the first one. This switch statement right now is transitions. Transitions. So that means that we're going to be writing when you go from one state to another and when you stay on its own state. That's transitions. So in our switch statement, we're going to have our cases. Well, we always start with our initialization or our start. So in this case, we're going to have case init. And we know that state, the state, let me finish spelling that. State always goes to off release. No matter what you do when you start this machine at the initialization stage, you always start it there. It goes straight to the off release. So that means that our state is going to be off. And we're going to call this off release. If I was really proper, I would write off underscore release and have it match this exactly. And that's what you should do. But for this case, it's easier to write it like that. So that's our state for our case initialization. And then at the end of that, we're always going to end with a break statement. Now we have our next case. And notice that we're going to be following the same format. We're going to have case for the state, end with a break. And this is all of the transitions from that state. So initialization only has one arrow coming off of it. And it goes straight to off release, which means that state becomes off release, and you only have one statement in that case. If we look at off release, notice that we have got 2 arrows coming off of it. We have one going to on press and one staying on off release. So that means that within our case for off release, we've got 2 states. We know that when A0 is true, we go to on press. That's a simple if statement. If A0 is true, state equals A0 is true, state equals on press. If it's not going to on press, what do? Well, you just hang out on off release. We don't have to do an if else statement. We could say if else A0 is not A0. We could stay on the off release. But since there's nothing else, we're just going to do if else and say that the state equals off. Off release. And then again, we end with break. And that's the end of our case for off release. We're going to continue this for every single state. So for the case of on press, if A0 is true, we stay on press. If A0 is not true, or else, we go to on release. You're going to write a case for each state. So here we've got 5 states, 4 for the button, 1 for the start, and that's how I finish it off. Switch statements typically end in something called a default case. What happens if none of the cases are met? If you're never in initialization, if you're never in off release, it's kind of a fail-safe. At the end of your switch statement, after you write all of your code for all of your cases, then you're going to have case default, and that's just going to break. And that's the end of your switch statement. So that's our first switch statement for transitions. Now, what about our actions? What are actions, you ask? Well, actions are what happens on our states. So where do we set B1 equal to 0 and B1 equal to 1? Well, that's going to be in our actions. So below our switch statement for transitions, then we're going to have another block of code that's our action switch statement. It's still going off of our int state, and we're still going to have cases, and we're still going to have default. However, now all we're going to do is say our outputs. So in this case, we're going to have off release. And in that case, we set B1 equal to 0 and break. Then we're going to have the case of, do we do any actions in on press? No. Do we do any actions in on release? Yes, we set B1 equal to 1. So we're going to have case on release. And we're going to set B1 equal to 1 and break. Again, you'll finish all your switch statements for your cases, all your cases. I think this is all. Yeah, this is all the cases there are for a switch statement for actions for this one, which means at the end you're going to have default and break and end your switch statement. And that is how you change a state machine to code with your switch statements. Now, there's other code that goes with this. That's for your C code when you're writing this for your computer science class. And that code is a very strict base template. You can add a timer to it. You can do a bunch of modifications to it to implement any state machine. For now, the rest of the code will be in the description below this video. But the switch statements is really important, and that's how you get the code from your state machine. Thanks for watching.